Welcome to MANTSOE, which is the interview platform for the Public Law Corner. My name is Dondi Mraudi and I'm the chief editor of the Public Law Corner, which is a blog in affiliation with the Southern African Public Law Journal. MANTSOE is our interview platform where we will be engaging in conversations, debate, and dialogue with lawyers, scholars, activists, and people working in the public law space. Through this platform, we hope to amplify the voices, particularly voices of Africans working in this space. And for the first episode, we had the honor of having a conversation with Professor Dire Tladi, who is South Africa's candidate for a seat at the International Court of Justice. Through this interview, we hope that you'll get to know Dire and you'll get to have an understanding of his career in public international law up until this point, but also his vision for his time at the International Court of Justice. We hope you enjoy. So just to start, can you share with me a little bit about how you were introduced to the field of international law and what motivated you to become an international lawyer and scholar? And was it deliberate or was it sort of one of those you fell into it things?
Yeah, no, I definitely didn't fall into it. I got introduced to international law actually even before studying the subject. I in my second year, my first year, my second year, I participated in the All African Code competition, which of course is which of course is based on an international human rights law problem. So in that way, there was already an interest in international, or at least that helped develop an interest in international law, at least international human rights law. And we did pretty well in that. So my teammate and I did pretty well in that competition. We won that competition. And this is, as a second year law student, doing international human rights law, and you hadn't done international law, you hadn't done human rights law, it's quite impressive. I must confess though that my teammate was actually the star of the team. I was the weak link. I have to confess. But the result of doing well in that competition was that we were then selected to represent the University of Pretoria in the Jessup Moot Court competition, which is a pure public international law problem.
Yeah.
And remember, I'm still in my second year. Yeah. I'm still in my second year. I still haven't done international law, and it was a very complicated problem, but I just thought this is really, really interesting. And so again, we did fairly well in the Jessup. We won the national rounds. And in the international round, we came 16th, which was at the time the highest that a South African team had gone. So that's pretty much how I got hooked, onto international law. So it was clearly deliberate, because from that point on, I knew this is, I can't wait to do international law in my fourth year, and this is going to be my career.
Yeah. So based on that, did you ever plan on sort of serving articles or doing that sort of thing, going the classic attorney advocate route, or were you always sort of convinced you'd get into international law via academia, or how did that work exactly?
Yeah, no, I knew I wasn't going to do articles. I knew I was going to do articles. I always knew I wanted to do law. And when I finished high school, law was a thing, but I had this crisis because I knew I didn't want to do articles. And of course, as you said, articles is the classical route to go. And I didn't want to do articles because in my high school, we had there was a program called the work experience program. So in the June vacation of your pre-matric year, whatever what's called now, I think it's called grade 11 now. You went to a law firm and you spent time at a law firm. So I went to a law firm in Johannesburg. It was at the time one of the biggest law firms, Denise Reitz. And I spent a month there. And I spent a month there, and I was with a candidate attorney. And I knew just watching the things that she did that this is not what I want to do. I just absolutely don't want to do this. I still remember the main case she was handling. That's how much traumatic it was. So I went into law school thinking I want to study law, but I know I don't want to do the main thing that people do with lawyers, with law degrees. I mean, I had read, that there are many things you can do. You can become a legal advisor. So at that point, I thought, I might become a legal advisor. I thought I might become an academic. In fact, in my first year, I had many, many good law teachers, and they inspired me to want to do what they were doing. So that's pretty much how I got into academia.
Can you name a few of those teachers that sort of inspired you?
Yeah, I mean, I had Franz Fouillon was probably, he was probably the most inspirational of all.
He's responsible for a lot of us ending up in this.
I can imagine, and yeah, I mean, when I encountered him, he was much younger than when you encountered him. Surely, he wasn't even a professor. He wasn't even an associate professor.
Oh, hectic.
He was a senior lecturer, but he was just so passionate about what he did, and there was just something very inspirational about him. And the way he taught and the passion and so on. There were others, there was also Dire Tladi who was very interesting.
It's pretty rare. I think what I've realized is a lot of people either sort of go your route where they've always known they want to go into international law, which I think for your time might be slightly a bit more rare than now, where people sort of are aware of international law and really want to go into international law and aspire to go into it from a pretty young age. But I think on the most part, a lot of people really fall into international law and they find themselves there when they were maybe trying to get into like a business LLM or something like that. So that's pretty interesting. And then I wanted to find out from you, when you reflect on the ICJ's impact on international law, do you have any sort of favorite cases or any sort of landmark or fundamental cases that you feel like are the sort of like main ICJ cases that you look into when you consider what the impact is of the ICJ or how the ICJ contributes to international law? What are your faves?
Yeah, my faves, I guess. I mean, I think I like the South Africa. Well, I shouldn't say I think the South Africa cases in general. So the Southwest Africa cases, the 2 Southwest Africa cases, or the 4 Southwest Africa cases, depending on how you look at it. And the Namibia opinion, I think together are incredible incredible in terms of their impact further down the line. And I think they're also interesting in terms of how different they are in terms of the outcome. And I think they're also interesting in terms of they challenge me as somebody who's always very critical of people that stretch the law, bend the law to the point where it's not recognizable as law anymore. But they challenge that perception of mine because, in a sense, many of the things that we are proud of today happened because, in the Namibia opinion, for example, the court, presumably in order to achieve a particular outcome, bend the law to the point of non-recognition. I mean, I think apartheid South Africa's argument in the Namibia opinion that the resolutions were not properly adopted was probably correct. It's probably correct to say the Security Council resolutions were not properly adopted because there wasn't concurrence from all. So that's one. And I also think, a case that has had lasting impact is the North Sea continental shelf cases, which is very interesting because, in fact, it didn't really have an outcome. It kind of almost told the parties, we can't help you. And yet it had a lasting impact just in terms of fundamental approaches to the sources and the relationship between the various sources, I think, in that sense. I think for a similar reason, Nicaragua, although I think Nicaragua was also impactful more substantively in terms of the law and the use of force, and try as they may, it's so difficult to get away from it, even though so many big scholars today try to sort of downplay Nicaragua. So I would think those 3. I think I mean obviously there there are many interesting modern cases as well. One might point to Chagos, but I think there are limitations there as well. So
okay. Now you're giving me PTSD with some of those. And then was aspiring to become an ICJ always a goal for you, or did it emerge at a certain point in your career? And what sort of prompted you to seek this specific role as a judge at the ICJ?
So it wasn't always a goal, but it became goal is a strong word because it's not as if everything I
Yeah.
did was aimed, but it became something that I hoped would 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 come my way one day. I always understood that success in international law, in fact, success in life in general, is based on what you do, but there's also quite a lot of luck involved in it. I mean, um, so um, so yeah. I mean, it wasn't a goal, but it was something that I thought, it would be great. It would be great for me, but also be great in terms of the opportunity to contribute to international law from a different perspective. Um, but yeah, I have to emphasize that a lot of it is based on luck. And I'm
Yeah.
I'm I'm I'm
I
very
think
conscious
that's
of the
it.
fact, yeah, and I'm very
Yeah.
conscious of the fact that, for example, one person's misfortune, unfortunately, one person's misfortune is, also happens to be your fortune. I have a pretty good chance of winning. I have also, I mean, there's a huge chance I might lose, but I have a pretty good chance of winning. And part of the reason for that is because someone who also deserved to win and become a judge didn't become a judge, and that's John Dugard.
Yeah.
Had he
Yeah.
won, the road, my road would have been a lot more difficult,
Yeah.
because people would have been able to say, yeah, you want to dominate everything. You've just had a judge not too long ago, and so on. If I'm victorious now, someone who 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years from now from South Africa, who maybe is a much better international lawyer than I am, their chances are certainly much smaller. So there's, a whole lot of luck involved, and I'm
Yeah.
very conscious of that, and I don't take that for granted. I'm in a very privileged position, and I think that's important to sort of recognize. I think.
Yeah. I mean, with international law, the luck factor plays in right from the beginning, right? It's
Yeah,
literally the stars have to align, otherwise
yeah,
it may not work out. And then you touch on this a little bit in your campaign video. But you've expressed that you've sort of worn multiple hats. You've worked in government, you've had a career in academia, you've been a member of the commissioner, you've also now got some experience as a practitioner. But how do you believe that these roles will complement and shape your approach as a judge, sorry, at the ICJ?
yeah. I mean, I think, well, my role as an academic, I think, is important just because that's that's the hat that gave me the knowledge of international law.
Yeah.
So it's absolutely fundamental. And in fact, I think that's the most important. I mean, I think that's the most important, particularly the kind of academic I was or I am, that sort of focuses on international law broadly speaking and doesn't have a
Yeah.
specialization, so to speak. Um, my role as a government employee and practice in that sense is useful because it it helps it helps you see in international law from the perspective of states, and and I know that's not necessarily a good thing. I think it is a useful thing because a lot of times who we judge is we're judging states, and it's good to be able to know constraints of states. Yeah, it's easy in academia to sort of always, no, this state should have done that. But
Yeah.
until you've seen the constraints that they act under, it gives you a certain appreciation. I always say, if I look at the things that I wrote before I became an academic, and I'm sorry, before I worked for government, and the things that I wrote afterwards, it's vastly different. And it's not just because of intellectual maturity. Of course, intellectual maturity is part of it. You
Yeah.
grow as a person every time, every year, um, and so certainly that's part of the change, but it's not the only explanation. The other explanation is also just this ability to understand that this state may have done this thing that we all question, but it's not based on pure evil. Role as a practitioner in the sense of acting in whatever capacity, whether as expert or as counsel before international tribunals. I think that's just useful because it's important to know how courts work, and that's it at least it shows you from one angle, how courts work. For me, the ILC is the melting pot of it all. It combines all of these, and so for me, that's yeah, that for me is the main one. There's still skills that that you have to learn, or approaches that you have to. I mean, if I'm elected in each of these roles, I've adopted a position, and my function has been to convince the other. As a judge, the function is different. Your role is to have an open mind and to listen to arguments. And not only allow yourself to be convinced, but actually want to be convinced by both sides. And that's perhaps a slightly different approach, but I'm sure with time it'll come.
And if you had to choose 3 words to describe your vision for your tenure as an ICJ judge, what would they be, and why are these words significant to you in fulfilling your role on the bench?
So 3 words that would describe what?
Your vision for your tenure as an IC judge.
3 words includes phrases or word. You want word?
Right? 3 words or 3 phrases?
Yeah. So work ethic.
Okay.
And you also asked why. And the reason I mention it, I shouldn't actually have to mention it. It should go without saying that I'm going there to work. But there are many people that go to the ICJ as, to retire. And indeed, they're entitled to it because a lot of them are actually at retirement age. So yes, but I'm going there to work, and I hope that I bring my work ethic with. The second word is solidarity. And that's if my vision of international law is an international law that promotes solidarity, understanding, of course, that the function of a judge is not to give freedoms to your vision of international law, but to apply the law. But I guess in this context, my hope is that the way in which I understand international law and will be such as to help contribute to the court facilitating a more solidarity-based international law. And there's different ways that courts can help contribute without manufacturing law, because I also don't like the idea of manufacturing.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, third word. I had it when so the third word is open-mindedness. I think, it's to have an open mind about different arguments that are put forward.
Right. And then, this may be easier for you to answer because right now you're sort of an outsider looking in, and you're an academic, which means you're usually looking at the court, what the court is doing, and you may have certain criticisms of the court. But what do you perceive as the current challenges facing the ICJ, and how would you address these challenges once you were sort of on the inside?
Yeah, it sounds like you've been briefed by the people I'm campaigning, because they all ask me that question. I mean, the question of the challenges. So I'm going to tell you what I've been telling them, in part because I actually believe it. I obviously can't talk about the jurisprudence. I mean, I can't already say. But what I would say at the moment is, you would know this, the significant increase in the caseload of the court is obviously a huge challenge. I mean, it's a good challenge to have, but it is a challenge. Obviously, the response should not be to not want more cases, because more cases means that, at least in theory, it means that your clients, the states, are trusting you. But it does mean that the court is going to have to grapple with the tension between retaining the quality of its work and quick turnaround. So the other challenge was, I think the other challenge is, it's not so much a challenge for the court, but just for the system. A lot of the cases now are proper contentious jurisdiction cases. I mean, so it's not, it's not compromise, this dispute arise, let's go to the court to help us. It's this dispute arise, you don't want to go to court, I'm dragging you to court because I can.
Yeah.
And that, of course, creates the possibility of non-compliance, or at least it increases the possibility of non-compliance. I think that's a challenge for the system. I don't think the court necessarily needs to concern itself with that. The court just needs to do its work, and its work is to render its judgments.
Yeah. You've touched on this a little bit already, but some cases at the ICJ, especially now with we have a lot of cases that are contentious, right? So they may involve significant political pressure and outside influence. And how would you approach maintaining impartiality and upholding the rule of law in the face of such pressure?
Yeah, I think it's tough. I'm giving the court the benefit of the doubt to say that it has done that, and that sometimes even when it's reached a decision that I think that it's not because of political pressure or geopolitical circumstances, but because it it really believes that I've always been opposed to narratives. I just and I think it's important for judges to ignore narratives, and it's hard for judges to ignore narratives. Well, it's hard for human beings to ignore narratives, because very often a narrative might mean allowing Dire the freedom to do what he wants, even though the thing that Dire wants to do is a bad thing.
Yeah.
But once the narrative that what Dire wants to do is a bad thing, is evil, takes hold, the question is whether or not the court must now act consistent with that narrative at the expense of law. And my sense is that shouldn't be the case. Now again, I pause to add that there's a tension between this that I've just shared with you and what I said about the Southwest Africa cases and sort of this because that was an instance, I think, where probably narrative played a role, right? And this is a narrative against apartheid, and which is good. But the only thing I can say in my own defense is that at least I own my inconsistencies, and I don't hide from them. They're there.
Okay. And then if elected, you would be the first South African to sit on the ICJ bench. What unique perspectives or qualities do you think your training as a South African lawyer bring? And how could these aspects positively impact the court's proceedings?
I've never thought about that. I don't know that there's anything specific to my training in South Africa. I mean, I don't think there's anything specific that I do think what will certainly help, and maybe, again, goes back to this thing of seeing things from different perspectives. I think what will definitely help is this idea that my training in international law came from three very different types of institutions, three very different continents, three very different countries. The LLM, the LLB in South Africa, it's sort of the South African, the Southern approach, if you like. Although I must also confess, I mean, I went to the University of Pretoria. I don't think there's anything very Southern about that university. Certainly not when I was a student. But I also think that and then the very strong traditionalist, realist American approach to international law, I think is I learned international law, very different. And then of course my PhD was, although that's different because you're not learning international law, that you're supposed to be contributing to knowledge. So maybe that's not such a good example of what I do think will make will be different. It's just another voice from the South, and hopefully a voice from the South that is that's influential. Because it's easy to have voices from the South, but you have to be able, I think, to engage with people, to be able to engage with different views and to be able to convince.
Yeah. Okay, that's all I had on my side. But I just wanted to add another thing is I think a big part of the role of the judges at the ICJ, particularly with the Judicial Fellowship Program and with the P2 program with the permanent clerks, is to sort of contribute to the future of international law and train future international lawyers.
Yeah.
And what were your thoughts on that, particularly coming from the Global
Yeah.
South?
Yeah.
But also, you know, there's this new trust, which is how I ended up at the ICJ. And I just wanted to know sort of how you perceive your role in that
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, I mean, again, so I can't speak ICJ specific in part because, well, in fact, not in part, just simply because I haven't been in,
Yeah.
and so I don't know what opportunities there are. But I will just say, um, I am a very strong supporter, adherent of the idea of promoting, future generations of international law. That's why, for me, the most important thing that I do at the university is my PhD students. And I always tell my PhD students, I say, I will know that I'm a success as an international lawyer if I walk into a room and it causes a stir, and then somebody asks, who is that guy? And the answer that they get is, oh, it's so and so's PhD supervisor. Because that tells me that my student was, so phenomenal and
Yeah.
sort of beat the world so much that that I am recognized by their success. And I see a lot, from my time on the ILC, I saw a lot how those that got opportunities were generally from the north. And so as soon as I got a little bit of funding, unfortunately, it was too late. It was in the last 2 years of my time at the ILC. I really made sure that I had, research assistants from the south, and not just from South Africa. I mean, I had research assistants, and it's obviously my own PhD students, but I also, I had students from India, and Latin America, and so on. Because I think it's critical that the stars of international law look different from what the stars of international law look like today.
This concludes our interview. Thank you so much for tuning in. We also want to thank Dire for agreeing to be a part of this little experiment and squeezing us into what I imagine to be a pretty busy schedule. We do hope to have more of these, and we hope that you'll tune in when we have more of these. So keep a lookout, and we hope to see you next time. Bye.